Welcome. I see that folks are signing in.
Bienvenidos. Puedo ver que ya las personas se están uniendo aquí.
We're so happy that you're here to join us to imagine an end to incarceration.
Estamos muy contentos de que están aquí participando en este evento de Imaginar la Justicia con Columbia Legal Services.
We'll start in just a few minutes.
Vamos a comenzar en unos minutos.
Okay, we'll first start with some introductory remarks about some of the logistics for the panel tonight. Danny?
Bueno, ahora vamos a comenzar con algunos detalles sobre la interpretación simultánea. Esta noche tenemos interpretación simultánea. In your meeting webinar controls, you can click on interpretation if you'd like to hear a simultaneous interpretation that's going to be provided tonight. En los controles de reunión de webinar, puede hacer clic en interpretación en la parte de abajo de la pantalla. En unos momentos se va a poner. Los subtítulos, the subtitles, they're only available in English. Los subtítulos solamente están disponibles en inglés. Haga clic para ver la transcripción en directo.
Welcome, everyone. Good evening. I'm glad that you're all here and really excited to hear from our panelists this evening. Welcome to Imagine Justice Week at CLS. All week, we are celebrating different visions of justice. We are honored to have our panelists join us for tonight's discussion on imagining an end to incarceration. CLS envisions a future where no one is put in a cage, and everyone has equitable access to the protections and benefits of society. Our panelists today have their own bold vision of justice and ways they work toward those visions. Together, we will imagine a just future and an end to the long, violent, oppressive, racialized history of incarceration here in the United States. I'm honored to introduce our panelists. We have Stephen J. Fullwood. Stephen is the exhibition coordinator and lead archivist for Marking Time, a project created by Dr. Nicole Fleetwood to promote public awareness around issues of mass incarceration, affirm the dignity of people incarcerated and formerly incarcerated, and support new visions for shared public safety. Before joining the Making Time team, Fullwood was an archivist and curator at the Schoenberg Center in Research in Black Culture, New York Public Library, for over 19 years. We have Amijah Smith. Amijah is the community queen who lives just a few miles from where she grew up in the Central District, a historic Black community. With over a decade of experience in legislative advocacy and a lifetime of community organizing, she also has a master's in public administration, is Mercer Middle School's parent-teacher student association president, and an anti-racist organizer who works alongside numerous community organizations and groups, including the Black Prisoner Caucus and Village of Hope. Amijah is the granddaughter of Mildred and Florine, in whose home she first learned the fundamental right of self-determination for every person and how to take care of community. Amijah honors her grandparents, parents, and all those who came before her as she runs for state representative of the 37th District in Washington. Anthony E. Hamilton. Mr. Anthony E. Hamilton is from Seattle, Washington, and played basketball for Franklin High School. He himself was adopted at birth and has a passion for the reunification of families who have been separated by adoption and foster care, and is a proponent for interrupting youth gang violence. Mr. Hamilton would like to share his experiences, expertise, and knowledge about the criminal legal system, particularly the Department of Corrections. Amazing group of folks we have here. I just want to check in and see if Mr. Hamilton is on the line. It sounds like maybe not yet. Kia?
Hey Murph, yes, I have him on, except it's still not showing up on my phone. So I'm gonna go ahead and connect with my phone via Zoom and just have him on the Teams like Charlie did during the board meeting. So,
Okay,
yeah, give me a second.
okay. I'm going to ask folks to please be patient and wait 1 minute before we begin with our panel discussion. A nice time at the end of a busy day to take a few breaths. And have a little bit of silence in our day. If you have just joined, we're waiting for one of our panelists to join and figuring out some technical issues. So we'll be starting the panel discussion in just a few minutes. If you've just joined us, we're waiting until our panelist, Mr. Hamilton, is able to join. And we should be starting in just a minute or two. So I appreciate your patience. If you've just joined us, we're waiting a few minutes for one of our panelists to be able to join us. We internally are having some technical challenges that we're trying to fix. I think we're almost there, and we're gonna get started with the first question. To begin, I'm going to ask us to say a little bit about how incarceration has impacted our lives, and I'll begin by sharing my own story a little bit. One of the things we try to model at CLS is vulnerability and transparency. So I will start off and then ask each of the panelists to share on the same question. So for me, I haven't been incarcerated myself. The other day, I got in the car after soccer practice with another parent, son, and another child, and they were asking me why I was going to miss practice tonight. I'm one of the assistant coaches, and I said I was moderating a panel on imagining a world without incarceration. And my son said, "Well, you've been incarcerated." And I thought, well, not exactly. I haven't been incarcerated in the criminal justice system. I had some challenges and engaged in criminal activity, including selling large quantities of marijuana, assault, and other activities that could have led me when I was in New York State to significant prison time in the late 80s under the Rockefeller drug laws. But that didn't happen to me. And I think that is because I am white and I was sent through the mental health system. I have experienced being mental health arrested. I have experienced being put in 5-point restraints, otherwise known as a straitjacket, at several times, and have been put on hold and unable to move about freely. And so the feeling of being restrained, the feeling of being locked behind locked doors in a very small space, I understand that feeling. I do not know what it's like to be sentenced to prison or to jail time. I do know what it's like to be locked up and not know when I would be able to be released. And that's how that portion of incarceration hasn't affected me. But because I was placed in this civil system, I never had to say that I was mental health arrested. I never had to say that I committed any crime, because the question I was always asked was, have you been convicted of a crime? Of which I never was. But that didn't mean that I hadn't committed many crimes. And so that's how incarceration has impacted my life and why I want to end mass incarceration for everyone. So people have opportunities, and that we're working from a system of healing and accountability rather than punishment and shame. And so I'm going to open it up to start the conversation. Stephen?
I have a very large cat on my lap right now, so I hope you'll bear with me as I both calm him down. Usually when I'm doing Zooms, he sits next to me on the floor, but today he wants to join in the conversation. Thank you very much for inviting me to this conversation today. I want to dedicate this part of my talk or my commentary to my brother, Daryl Fullwood, who was incarcerated twice in his life. And so the question, how has mass incarceration or just impacted my life, really, it starts with him. It starts with my brother, Daryl, who was born in 1968 and went to prison twice, to Mansfield, Ohio, Mansfield prison there before the age of 22. The first time he went for a conviction for burglary, and then the second time was violating his parole because he said he accidentally set a garage on fire. And what I want to say about that time was that during that time, I would visit him and I would also send him money as well. And he would write me letters and so forth. And I remember feeling really disconnected from him and disconnected from that particular moment, because at that point, I had just moved out. I was going to college, and I had moved out of the neighborhood that was besieged by drugs and gang activity. And I'm originally from Toledo, Ohio. And it just started around that time. So this is like 1985, 1986. And I remember being disconnected from him for a while and really not knowing how to talk with him until much later, until he passed away in 2016. In our family, we have a series on my mother's side, we don't live longer than 50 or 55. People drop off or leave the earth around in their 40s. And so, but just getting to know him and talking with him as an adult was a joy, and also very painful to watch him suffer through such a series of illnesses. And the reason why I took the job with Marking Time as an exhibition coordinator and lead archivist is because I wanted to honor his memory and also begin to think more critically about his story. And working with Nicole Fleetwood, who wrote the book Marking Time, Art and Age of Mass Incarceration, it has been, she hired me in 2021, and we've been to 4 venues. So we started MoMA PS1 during the pandemic. And since then, we've been exhibiting in Birmingham, Alabama, Cincinnati, Ohio, and now in Providence, Rhode Island. We opened up last week. And during this time, learning about the particularities of mass incarceration prior to that, but also seeing it in real time, meaning that I'm talking with folks who are formerly incarcerated, currently incarcerated, artists whose work expose the carceral system and make it more available to the general public it's been really a blessing. I mean, working at the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture it was just simply a lab, learning about everything that Black folks have ever done, and they did everything to be free in this country and other countries. You learn that there's so many systems of oppression trying to come for you that you find different ways to try to live and to be in this world. And so the Schomburg was really great, not just as an archivist and processing papers, but also learning about, like, for example, I had the opportunity to work on the Malcolm X papers, the James Baldwin papers, the Lorraine Hansberry papers. And Malcolm, along with a few other people who we had papers at the Schomburg with, did experience incarceration. And it's what they did with their experiences that continues to vibrate out into the universe and inspire people to not only tell their story, but also fight the system and understand what abolition means in this context. And the last thing I'll say is that I think that understanding what it means to understanding incarceration means we understand the US, right? So we understand slavery, we understand Jim Crow, we understand something called Reconstruction, which was never really Reconstruction. But we understand how Black and brown people and a significant amount of whites as well have continued to be fed into the system so that capitalism can work. And so for me, I think about incarceration in that regard. Sometimes I think through what it is and how the status quo is determined to keep it in that way. So I'll stop there.
Thank you for sharing your story and that information, Stephen. Really impactful and powerful to hear about your brother. Amijah, do you have reactions to Stephen's story, and how has incarceration impacted your life?
Thank you. Well, incarceration has impacted my life in so many fashions, but in particularly breaking my family apart, breaking my community apart. And I think about just being a young girl, visiting a loved one throughout my whole life, really, but starting as a young person, thinking about seeing family members there that I just loved and didn't understand why they were taken from me, thinking about the gifts and the brilliance and the talent that's ripped out of community. I think about the family members, and I don't want to share their names, but there's fathers that are ripped apart. Your partners are ripped apart from you. And then being a family member, right? To not have your community there close to you for reasons that I couldn't understand. So I'm thinking about the failed war on drugs and the over-policing and the criminalization of addiction. I think about my own children trying to walk through their own neighborhood and community, feeling safe and just being their best selves, but always under attack of possible incarceration. You can't have a conflict I believe in my community without the thought of some, the police is going to come and you're going to go to jail. So I've had experiences where I'm trying to protect myself, my children, the police come and go to jail, but also having issues of not wanting to call the police at all out of fear of, losing my life. So it's either incarceration or death. When I think about this system, it's impacted my life to the extent of being a descendant of stolen ones, that I feel like, well, I believe that incarceration is an extension of the 13th Amendment to continue enslavement in this country. So really having to deal with the Constitution and eradicate that clause out of there. I think about how people in their minds think, oh, someone went to jail, oh, they're a felon, oh, they're incarcerated, now we're supposed to throw people away. And that's not a value system that I have. It's about walking with people in their redemption. Also, being a community queen that I am, I don't not only take care of my children, I take care of other children in the community. And so I think about that prison pipeline impacting our young people in the schools. And the next thing you know, the mindset is to throw these people away because they've been incarcerated, throw our children away, throw our family members away, throw our loved ones away. And that's not a value system that I hope, no, we take care of, because although someone becomes incarcerated, they're still connected to community and connected to family. So I've had personal impacts in my life since I've been a child, from uncles to cousins to my friends, my peers, being incarcerated. And so because I see the humanity in them, because I understand their brilliance, because I see the injustice in our system, I'm a fierce advocate around reforms, a fierce advocate. I do believe in accountability, no question, but I don't believe in the form or the fashion that it's in now, again, being a continuation of enslavement. So it's impacted my life to the point that, again, I'm a fierce advocate, but it breaks my heart to know that I have relatives and loved ones and the lack of support in there. So that's basically my story. Thank you.
Thank you, Amaja. We're going to take a 5-minute break now because Mr. Hamilton is on the line and also has been on the line for about 20 minutes. So we will take a break so that he can call back in and also give our interpreter time off as well. So we will be back here and folks will have an opportunity during the 5 minutes, hopefully, to process the information that you've heard and formulate some comments or questions. So take 5 minutes and we will be back around 6:30. It looks like Mr. Hamilton is having to wait in line to call back into the panel. So we are going to wait just another minute to see if he can call in so that he can participate in the panel. I appreciate everyone's patience. We're going to go ahead and get started as Mr. Hamilton is still waiting. So we'll come back to Mr. Hamilton when he is able to join. Which is an example of the difficulties and the barriers that folks face, just as simple as trying to be on a call. So thank you, Amijah and Stephen. What does a future without incarceration look like to you?
I'm happy to
Amijah?
go first. And so Mr. Hamilton joins, I'm happy to be interrupted also.
Great.
Just want to say thank you for the time you're taking for those who are English language, who need interpretation, as well as those who have the barriers of incarceration. You know, this is a tricky question because I don't have all the answers, but I do think about other countries that look at incarceration differently, like really putting investments around what it looks like to be a productive person in society.
Mhm.
So
Mr. Hamilton is back. Sorry to interrupt you, Amijah.
no worries, thank you.
Welcome, Mr. Hamilton. Glad you were able to sign back on.
Oh, hello. How are you doing?
We're doing just great. So I was going to take you back to the question about, if that's okay with you, about how incarceration has impacted your life.
How has incarceration impacted my life?
Yes.
Well, personally, my experience is it's kind of a little different because it worked for me positively because of just my upbringing and to where I lost my parents when I was young, when I was young, and which kind of caused a lot of trauma. Now I know that it caused a lot of trauma to where I was just doing wrong things and getting mixed up in the wrong crowds and just doing bad things, which led me to prison. And during my time in prison has given me a chance to find myself and to understand why I was doing the things that I was doing. And when I start realizing that, things just start coming to me, positive things and just positive answers to the questions that I've had. And what came to me is me finding out that I was adopted. And so what that did to me, it made me ask the questions, and then find out the answers to what was wrong with me. And to me, it felt like it was just a disconnect, not only from my family and who I was, but just everything. And so what it caused me to do is just say, okay, well, I have to heal myself and I have to figure this out. So I had to start searching for my family. And as I started doing all that, just all kinds of positive things start happening for me. And just, I felt better. You know, I felt relieved. And just in short, I mean, I found my mother and my family in 2017 for the first time. I seen my mother's face. And when I seen my mother, it was like everything just lifted out of my body, and I just felt like I was being healed. And so now I know who my family is. I know my mother. I've learned who my father was, and I found I had a brother that was locked up for 44 years, and he just recently got released. And just a lot of positive things have been happening to me. And now I had life sentences, and now the laws have changed for the robbery tools, and now I am awaiting to be resentenced. So for me, it was positive because I've been able to heal myself and make myself a better man.
Thank you, Mr. Hamilton. I'm gonna come back to you with another question, seeing as your time is somewhat limited, and Elijah had started to answer this question, but what does a future without mass incarceration look like to you, where folks don't have to go to prison, where there's a different system in place for accountability?
Is that for me?
That's for you, Mr. Hamilton. Since you were the last on the first, you'll be the first on the second. If you can follow that logic.
Well, to me, a future without incarceration, I think it would be more about, for me being here, I realize that a lot of these guys are not bad guys naturally. There are some, but pretty much when you take them away from all that just society and you really dig deep into people, they're not really bad guys. A lot of people just have, like I had, just trauma and just all kind of things wrong mentally with them. And as soon as you heal them, like I've seen a lot of my friends that have been locked up for a long time, and now they've gotten out and they're doing great things. And I just think that it would be better if things were set up to where it wasn't about just locking people away and throwing away the key. That you would just set up a system to where, people can just get help and learn special skills and just learn how to do things. Because when I was out, a lot of things I didn't know how to do because I didn't grow up around a lot of just certain positive things and people telling me positive things. So if you had something in place to where you can teach people how to have bank accounts, how to pay your bills and stuff like that, and how to communicate better with your friends and your families and stuff like that, just showing more positivity and just having more of a family setting and just stuff like that. It's kind of hard because there is crime and people have to be held accountable for their crimes, but it should just be set up in a different way. I really don't have the answer for that all the way, but I think things should be set up a little different to where it's more family orientated, and it doesn't just separate you from your family, but it teaches you how to get to know your family and to it just brings you together as a family and not just spread you apart as a family, and not only a family, as a community. That's pretty much all.
Thank you, Mr. Hamilton. Elijah, what do you think?
I share the thoughts and the words that Mr. Hamilton just stated, but I'm thinking about systems that were before racism and people, the colonialism coming into other communities. I'm thinking about what did other cultures do to resolve conflict and host accountability. Restorative justice is something that's been around forever, right? So there's some things that we need to look at and how we can mitigate a situation. I think our current carceral system does not allow the victim to really just have a choice in how they want to see things resolved. I know for me, knowing that the justice system is really unjust and is steeped in racism, I might want to go about resolving an issue a different way, but the system doesn't allow you to do that. They talk about the victims, but really it comes from this prosecution's lens of really just being hard on folks. And our system doesn't take into account how, when they came into this country on indigenous lands, how they pillaged and raped and did all kind of horrible things to people. And there's no accountability. It's like, that's just what we do. So I think our carceral system is a reflection of that mindset. And I think that we need to flip a system to be more about healing, more about restoration, and really investing, like Mr. Hamilton said, mental health investments or what have you, to mitigate harm that has happened to anyone, particularly children. I mean, my heart goes out to children and young people. So I see things as like rehabilitation, right? Do you need to be, it's no disrespect to people who have to live inside current prisons, but do they need to be in these cages? It's all loud. I mean, there's just more trauma there. Can it be in a space where you can actually think, right? So that you can actually heal, where you can actually share with someone, I think this is what my issue is. I didn't have my dad, or my parents died, or, you know, I had some serious abuse as a child. Like those things, and that's not what's happening currently in our carceral system. And we're pouring a lot of money into those spaces, and we can utilize those same investments in wraparound service and services that are culturally relevant also, not just services that how one group would work with the services. So I would want to look back at what did our from the African civilization, what was happening then? What was happening with the indigenous community? How did they resolve the issues? Right now, they're looking at like Norway as another alternative look at incarceration. I appreciate it if it's working, but Norway is still not culturally relevant to me, to my community. And I would like to have a voice and be at the table of how I would structure something like that if I really want to bring healing and restoration to my community. And I also vision and think about that system having young children, trauma or not. I know that the current system is not going to support them. It's going to take us locking arms in community, moving in solidarity, and seeing the humanity in each of us to really problem solve. That's where my value system is. Thank you.
Thank you, Amaja. Stephen, do you have more to add to the vision from Mr. Hamilton and from Amaja about healing and services and culturally relevant and not just looking to Norway, another white culture?
Well, I really appreciate what Mr. Hamilton and Amaja were saying about restorative justice and learning things. I think education is really critical. And I think initially when I heard the question, I wrote, I think it's difficult to imagine a society because we've been born into a system that's really punitive. As Amaja was talking about, this colonial sensibility, this is ours, there's no accountability for it. I mean, reading land acknowledgements at the beginning of every program is helpful, but it doesn't redesign the institution that sits on it, right? It doesn't really do that. But what it does is it sometimes provides that moment of we're doing something, but we're not really doing anything. And I think that the root causes of oppression are so deeply ingrained in our consciousness and the way we understand relationships and hierarchies. I think you might have seen the meme that's going around with there's a Black man on the ground by the palace crying because the queen is dead. And I'm like, well, do you understand the history of colonialism? Do you understand that people are still benefiting from the oppression of others? I mean, and then there was yet another meme that said, quick, while the British Empire is distracted, go get your stuff from the museum. So this is really important to kind of think about how we might be replicating these systems of oppression when we do this restorative work. And restorative work, sorry, not really restorative, that's not the frame. The frame for me is really thinking about what would it mean to have free healthcare? What would it mean to have free education? That's really fortifying. And what Mr. Hamilton said, where they teach you something, some valuable skill sets, and what Amaja said about it being culturally relevant. I love Toni Cade Bambara, and I would recommend anyone who's interested in freedom work to read Toni Cade Bambara. There's a book called The Salt Eaters that I teach from time to time. It's called Salt Eaters, but the very first line is, are you sure, sweetheart, that you want to be well? Because there's a lot of weight in being well. And what that weight is so profoundly amazing and wonderful and worth living and fighting for, that it breaks the reason why I think it's hard for people to imagine a society without prisons or without locking people up and shame and all that is because they've been taught nothing better. But this is precisely the reason why we need to imagine a society without incarceration, with restorative justice, free education, and really get at those systemic problems. And as I mentioned when I first answered the previous question, is that there are systems in place that will do anything to maintain themselves. And we need to really recognize how we feed into those systems with our beliefs, where we shop, who we value, who we don't value. I'm really, really motivated by locking arms, as you mentioned, with folks in the community, various communities, with our chosen families, with our biological families, to really look at something that it really hasn't happened yet, as far as history goes, I guess, in some ways. It fits and starts here around just societies where your representatives actually represent your interest. But right now, it's capitalist game, and capitalism eats itself up. And again, as long as we feed into those systems, we can never really imagine something that is so profoundly beautiful and amazing. You get to eat, I get to eat. We get to have places to live. We get to, as I keep on saying Imija, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, Ms. Smith, how we can participate in our liberation in a way that makes sense to us. So if we commit a transgression against someone, we acknowledge it, we're held accountable for it. How do we work within that dynamic to bring about something, beautiful, wonderful, but also like you get to evolve, And I think right now in America, all you have to do is be a consumer. And you think freedom is choice. It's not choice. You think of freedom as being able to buy something. That's not freedom. Freedom is what I've been hearing all week long, but also Imija and Mr. Smith is really advocating for yourself, for your children, for your communities in ways that help us be larger, and not be reduced to a data point, And so I'll stop there.
Thank you, Stephen. We have about 3 minutes before Mr. Hamilton will get cut off and need to call in again. So I will read this question so folks can think about it, and then we will take a break. So this has been an incredible discussion. One of the issues that CLS struggles with is until we get to this amazing, incredible vision of a world without mass incarceration, to go back, and to be in a completely different space, how can we improve conditions for people living in prisons without simply sending more resources into the system? Do we need to do both, improve prison conditions and have an abolition mindset? And if it is, how do we do both? So that's the next question, and we'll take a short break, hopefully just a few minutes, so that Mr. Hamilton can call back in. Thank you. Mr. Hamilton is back on. Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back, Mr. Hamilton. And thank you for your patience, Mr. Hamilton, with this system. I appreciate it. So I'll open it up to the question. Mr. Hamilton, would you like to start?
Oh.
You can pass if you want to. That's fine, and come back to you.
Yeah, I would like you to come back to me real quick.
Yeah, Imija, would you like to start with this question around how we do and should we do both?
I'm kind of with the both and approach, to be honest. If I heard you correctly, I believe you were stating around the rehabilitation aspect of it, and then you may have to restate it.
Yeah, so one of the issues is that there are at times, and for the most part, horrible conditions in our prisons and jails where people face torture, solitary confinement, locked in cages, locked in handcuffs, sometimes weeks, months, years at a time in solitary confinement. Horrible conditions. How have a vision of abolition and freedom, and at the same time, invest resources to make the system better for those who are in it without sort of approving in a way of that system.
Right. So I see, like, in the meantime, until we get to the place that I would love to see vision, what can we do in the process? And what I would want to highlight to everybody here in the audience is that community is already doing the work. It's not the carceral system right now or the prisons that move Mr. Hamilton. Mr. Hamilton got proactive and motivated and moved for himself. And so, and also there's community members out here. So a great example is the Village of Hope, really walking alongside people in their redemption and helping them understand how we're connected with community. We're community together, and like, how do we support as community to bring in resources and to help people know that you have people who care about you and that you're valued, to help, again, give hope and provide motivational opportunities for people to want to invest in their healing, right? To be a success story. My work as a co-chair for the State Family Council, talking with families who have loved ones in the Department of Corrections. There's a long list of what can happen in the meantime. But the number one thing is, how do you keep families connected? How do you keep community connected? Because the mission is that you come out and you're successful. And the number one success, or the key piece of that, is you have connections, whether like Mr. Fullwood says, chosen family or your own family, organizations and networks, organizations like CLS that share that value. And so EFVs, there's family visitations, right? If someone's married, they can see their spouse, they can see their children. But what about when you have chosen family? There should be some time where you can have some more of that closeness, you know, to see your child. You know, why do you have to be married, you know, to have a loved one? I think about more engagement for parents, you know, particularly I'm thinking about the women inside, being able to still stay connected with schools, a family life, so much not separated, as long as it's in the safety and the well-being of those children and those families. There's a visiting, right? Making providing healthy food inside of there. Too many people are dying, to be honest. Lack of access to medications, lack of access to healthy foods, and just being kind of ignored and neglected. And so centering everyone's humanity, regardless of what they did. We're all human. And as far as I'm concerned, no one's greater or more valuable than someone else's, our humanity. And even if they've done something very dishonorable to themselves and dishonorable to the community, I should still treat people with the humanity that I want to be treated with. So there's so many different things that should happen. Medical care should not be denied. Income, people are in there suffering because they don't have the means. And so it shouldn't be a punishment to not have a means, and people should have a set basic of food, a shelter, and their basic needs on the inside, so they don't have to make any type of horrible choices in their survival. The list goes on, but again, at the end of the day, it's around keeping those family connections, not only for the person who's incarcerated, but for the families in the community on the outside, because that causes more trauma when you don't have that parent, you don't have that loved one, that person that you're depending on. And then the cost for phone calls, things to just stay connected. I mean, there's a long list, but so in the meantime, humanity should be first and foremost, and we should not be torturing anyone with solitary confinement. The conditions that are in there, there's so much that we can do, and we have the money to do it, and we have the innovation, and we have the solutions to do it. It's just that we have to push and transform the status quo, and to me, it's a wicked mind state. It's a wicked mind state to think that we should treat people as less than human beings and less deserving of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Maja. That's incredibly powerful vision. Mr. Fullwood, Stephen?
Y'all got me going after Maja, and she'd be like, I'm like, she's like looking at my list. But no, she lives in, I really admire her. And I would only add a few things to that. And largely, I come back to consciousness building and education. I think we do both and more And I know that community organizations and people are doing this work on the ground to improve the conditions in prisons, but also on the behalf of, but also with the incarcerated. What I would advocate for is how people who are not incarcerated begin to think about their own attitudes and examine their belief systems around incarceration. Because if we're talking about a paradigm shift that will stick, it's going to take a while for people to get out of the safety. I need to feel safe. I need to make sure that if someone commits a crime, they are punished for it kind of mindset. I believe in accountability as well. But centering that humanity piece, as Maja said, it brings a different light. It brings a different focus on what is going on with that person. And I think there's just so many misconceptions. It's like when I think about what we buy, knowing that a lot of materials we buy just to eat or clothing or whatever is made by prison labor. This isn't hard to figure out. You can go on the internet and figure out what you buy, where you live, and even know how your community is supported by prison labor. One of the things that Marking Time wasn't able to do when it was at MoMA PS1, they wanted to do a walking tour just around that area in Queens to show the different aspects of the carceral system that pop up that are in plain sight that you may not know about. So I continue to think about education as being one of the prime ways that we can understand and change the system and develop. But I think that I'm like, joy now, help people now, where they are. And again, it's not the system itself, it's the people. We need to get to the people. How do we provide relief and support in ways that require us to examine our humanity in really stark ways? You shouldn't have to have someone that you know or had to go to prison to be an advocate for someone's freedom in this way. And go back to Tony Capambara, making revolution irresistible. This is what we want to do. So through art, through testimony, Mr. Hamilton, these are the ways that we can imagine this better future that we're talking about. But then, as I said again, I'm for improving the material conditions of people who are incarcerated right now, people who are formerly incarcerated, and offering ourselves in very vulnerable ways that it's not a top-down thing. It's that we're speaking peer-to-peer. And when you lock somebody up, you lock up the people that love them.
Mm.
And we need to be really thoughtful about what that actually means. And for me, it means that in the case of my brother, because I moved out of the neighborhood and I was going to school, because the neighborhood was changing and my own attitudes were being challenged around, well, my brother did this and therefore, and it's like, well, I know that Black men and brown men get higher sentences and women get higher sentences than their white counterparts. These are just facts. And so he was a kid, you know? So part of the restorative justice that I'm doing for my brother is participating in these kinds of campaigns, you know, of awareness. So that's what I would add.
Yeah, that looking to joy and what you said about revolution and restorative justice for your brother, that justice is not something that just happens one time, that it's this continuation of healing that you both talked about. That's powerful. Mr. Hamilton, I'm going to go back to you if you have anything to add. And if you don't, to go on to a question about what do you think people misunderstand about incarceration or people who are incarcerated?
Well, I can, to the question before that, I agree with everything everyone's saying, but I still say that just believing in the old way that it takes a village to raise, a person. And what helped me was the fact that I did have people, and just like I said, there's a lot of guys getting out. And the thing that helped them was a lot of these organizations. Basically, what I would say is the community. The community, seeing as a Black man, to see my sisters and brothers come back into the institution and show us support, show us love, and talk to us and treat us as we're human beings and not criminals. And people don't realize how good it makes you feel to have people from the outside come in. And sometimes just something as simple as giving you a hug and asking you, how are you doing, brother? Or just saying we love you, and just simple things like that. And to be honest with you, even this opportunity right now, and how CLS was giving me the opportunity to even talk. And like I said, this is everything in my life going forward, but it's new to me. So all this is new, but this feels so good to be able to release and to speak for a long time. I was just quiet, and because I was trying to figure it out. I had to figure everything out pretty much myself. And one of the big issues that I'm challenging right now and I'm working on is getting mental health specialists, psychologists, Black psychologists to come into our BPC meetings to speak to us, because when we ask for help, we go to people that they can't understand anything that we're talking about, because they haven't experienced what we've experienced. So they listen to you and just say, okay, yeah, and the first thing they want to do is give you some pills. You know, they want to give you some pills and then get you hooked on drugs. And so what would be nice is to get more people of color to come in and speak to us. And especially, like I said, psychologists, Black psychologists who can come in and explain to us about post-traumatic slave syndrome, because we came into society just with an issue that we really don't even know about. You know, I talk to all the youngsters in here that come in here, and a lot of these guys come in here, they really don't understand what's going on in the world and history and stuff like that. They like me, they don't even know who they are. They hate their fathers, they hate their mothers, and they don't understand that their mothers and fathers went through something too, and they can't understand it. So I have to explain it to them just the raw and uncut way, and try to help them that way. Just and try to just give them psychological help that I learned just from my experience, you know. But I'm not a professional. But then again, I am a professional because I am a human and I've lived a certain life and I pretty much fixed myself. So I consider myself a professional from my experience. And I just think mental health is the key for, especially, like I say, people of color, because we grew up in certain areas and we experienced something, and we still carry the burdens of our ancestors and our people, the things that they've experienced. And it's so, oh my God, it's so hurtful inside. The pain that we feel is so deep, and people do not understand, and they're sending us in these courtrooms, and they don't realize when we're in those streets, it's like a zombie state of mind where you don't even really care about them. This guy, they don't even care about, they talk crazy and cuss at their parents and don't really understand it till they come to prison. And when they snap out of that zombie state of mind, then they kind of wake up and like, whoa, I'm in prison. So it's like an out-of-body experience. And we don't even understand what we're going through until we come in prison and get life in the penitentiary. And then 10, 20 years down the line, then you finally wake up and like, whoa, I'm in prison. I got all this time. I have to fight and fix myself to get out of here. And it's mental health. That is the key to everything. And I tell people that we've been having major discussions on this, to where it's just our people need help. The people of color, we just need help. Just people, period. Because now it ain't just us, it's everybody. There's these drugs. A lot of people are going through something very serious. I've been locked up like 26 years, and I've seen the change, and people are losing their minds, and they need help. And people are talking about it, but something has to be done. People need to come in these prisons and talk to people. You know, a lot of guys in here, we haven't seen successful people. And so it will be good to have successful people come in and talk to us, and embrace us, and show us that we're human. You know, and everybody should treat us like, you know, criminals, even though we've done wrong things. But deep down inside, we're good people. We had a discussion the other day about love, and everybody was given trying to explain what love is. And it kind of bothered me. And I finally just said, love is you. You are all love in your purest form. And that's what we have to get back to. You know, but I'll end right there. Thank you.
That's beautiful. We are all love in our purest form, and that's what folks misunderstand about people who are incarcerated. There's not really words to follow up with that, Mr. Hamilton. We have about 3.5 minutes before Mr. Hamilton needs to call in again, so we'll do the same routine. The next question is, what does freedom mean to you? And we'll talk about that, and then we'll open it up to folks for questions. So we'll take a break now. Thanks. Great music. Looks like Mr. Hamilton is back, and I think Amijah might be in transit. So, Stephen, Mr. Fleetwood, would you like to start? As we're talking about incarceration, and we're talking about being not incarcerated or a world without incarceration, what do you think about freedom as a concept? We hear a lot of talk about freedom, and what does it mean to you in the current world that we live in?
I'll talk about what it doesn't mean to me first, because that'll frame what it does mean to me. So as I mentioned earlier, or alluded to earlier, that freedom to buy something is not freedom at all. It's simply just being a consumer. And I think that I've been trying to be very precise about my language when we talk about how we talk about incarceration, mass incarceration, and how it impacts our communities. Freedom to me, I think so there's a woman by the name of Marion Stokes, and she was a producer of local television, an archivist, librarian. At one point, she was being groomed for leadership in the Communist Party. She was born in Philadelphia. There is a documentary about her called Reporter, the Marion Stokes Project. And what Marion was doing was going on television and talking public access and talking to different groups of people, different stakeholders in the community about what their interests were, what their values are, to use a term that I've been hearing a lot tonight. And so what she was doing, she realized that from night to night on the nightly news, a story would change. And as soon as she was able to do this, she began recording the nightly news. And she was an early investor in Apple. So she was able to use that money to buy several properties and have VCRs going 24 hours a day once CNN came in. A lot of people thought she was crazy, this Black woman, what is she doing this for? She should just be, doing whatever people think people should be doing. But what she was trying to do was her project was a media literacy project. She wanted people to have the information so they can make better choices about their lives and how they wanted to be in the world. And so something she said on one of her community access programs, that don't have it verbatim, I was searching for it today. It was around this idea of what freedom meant to her. And she goes, freedom means being able to choose. Having choices enhances my freedom. And again, as I mentioned earlier, freedom is not capitalism. That's just participating in a system that there's always a very large group of people that do not benefit from what you are doing. And so for me, freedom, I was sitting during the break thinking about this freedom project, this idea that I'm participating in community with other people and how they see it. And sometimes it looks radically different from the way I see freedom, which is it's more health insurance, free free healthcare, free education, restorative justice. And these aren't things that I'm thinking about as just being terms you throw out, but really thinking about, wow, wouldn't it be great to be an empowered human being, to have these things taken care of so they're not things that you have to worry about. Healthcare, childcare for mothers and fathers, people who are working. These things are freedom. The freedom dream for me is evolving and developing. And again, it's something that I don't feel like, I think it always should be just above one's head as you're reaching, because as we learn how to think about freedom outside of what we've been taught about freedom, is really important. It's really to have that that friction and that conflict, because freedom in the U.S. means, having a gun, or being able to buy a house, and these are just, I guess we're humans and we want shelter and we want to feel safe, but we can do this so much better. I think technology has shown us that it's outpacing us when it comes to how we treat each other. As long as we can feel like we should be able to throw people away, we're nowhere near where we need to be when it comes to living in a just, equitable society. So all of that wrapped in with the freedom dream. And again, education for me is critical, because you have to know that you've been miseducated or undereducated, and that the language you use sometimes disempowers you.
Wow, thank you. We're still processing all of that. It's incredible and a lot to think about. And I love the idea of thinking just ahead, or knowing that stretch piece, and that sort of openness to other ideas about freedom. And that that I can always have more, because my ideas are so squared in some ways with white supremacy and with a culture of incarceration and punishment and a home and a gun. That really struck me. Mr. Hamilton, what do you think about freedom? What are your thoughts? And what does freedom mean to you?
Freedom to me, like I say, just being in here is just taught me to simplify things. And freedom to me, what I now understand is that it is knowledge of self, knowing who you are and knowing where you come from. And I believe that once you begin to know who you are and what you're capable of doing, I believe that you can do most anything. And like I say, it's simple to me because, like I said, I just have a different understanding, and it's just knowing yourself. And once you begin to know yourself, like I said, there's no limits to what there really isn't any limits to what you can do. And it's just a spiritual thing. And I honestly believe that it's that simple, you know what I mean? And as a people, you know what I mean? That's why it's so important to know the history and be able to have those type of conversations, so everybody can know what's really going on and what's already went on. And and it's about knowledge. And when I say knowledge of self, I'm not even just speaking of me, myself, but as a people, just knowing who we are as a people, and once you begin to know that and start understanding why this happened and why that happened, then you can really sit down and have a conversation and not be biased, and you can open up to make things better. And until we keep hiding from from the truth and knowing really what's going on, then it's kind of hard to really have freedom as a people. But me personally, I just believe that it's me knowing myself and continuing to try to find out who I am and where I come from. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hamilton. And we have about 8 minutes left, so we'll try to get to the one question in the chat, but I want to turn to Amijah, who I know needs to jump off soon. What freedom means to you, Amijah, and if you have any last words for the panelists and the folks here with us in community tonight.
Thank you. This is a very touching question. Again, as I've shared, I am a descendant of stolen ones brought to stolen lands. But I agree 100% with what was already shared. Freedom is really knowing about who you are and your greatness, right? It is a priority, high priority for me to ensure not only do I understand the history, but also that my children and generations understand the history. And so I talk about I have my son learning over the summer about Timbuktu, the first university, in Africa, really understanding those dynasties, really understanding how African people, right? People have built and learned off of African people, have stolen from African traditions. You name it, there's so much, so enriched in the continent. But here over in the US and it's in other spaces too, where there's such normalized Blackness. When I say, or normalized anti-Blackness, and anti-Blackness is anything that is associated with African, right? So anything about us, how we speak, how we walk, our swag, all our greatness is to be put down in some form or fashion here in the US because of its structural racism, to be the haves and the have-nots. And so anti-Blackness is that put you at the bottom. But when you understand who you are, you walk in all the spaces, not only commanding respect, but demanding respect. And that's how I choose to try to show up. But you have to educate yourself. And it is really first and foremost, who are you connected to with your family, as Mr. Hamilton has shared, why it's so vital to reconnect. And then your chosen family, because then you're centered around people who share your values and your principles and ways of life, and then you pour it into community. But ultimately, it's like true liberation. And when I think about that liberation, I connect it to joy. When I see children who are just playing and just laughing, right? And just having just a sense of just like the world is good. And although I say that, I think about when my children are much younger too, and they're playing with certain kids and they might be roughhousing a little bit, throwing the ball. And I have to tell my Black son, you can't even play with that white child. Because if that white child trips and falls all by himself, they're going to come at you differently. That is an example of the lack of freedom that we have, because you're always feeling accosted. You're on eggshells in this society because we're melanated and because we have African features and our humanity is in stock. And so African and American and Black people are still fighting for our full to be seen in our full humanity in this country. So when I think of freedom, it is personal, how I feel, how I want to move through the world, how I speak or how I choose to dress, what name I want you to call me instead of somebody else calling me. No, my name is Amijah. You don't get to give me a nickname unless I tell you the nickname I want you to have. Those are the freedoms. I get to choose my family when you don't understand why I have fictive kin, but that's really my brother as far as I'm concerned, right? That chosen family. Our policies aren't set up to accept some of those things, right? And we have to look into what those freedoms look like, because they limit people and we other people. But there also is a true freedoms of just being in this country, and African American and Black people are still fighting for that, still trying to hold on to civil rights that are constantly being attacked all the time, from voting to where we can do, where we can go. And this carceral system, again, is one way that we have to attack it and break it down, reimagine it, because otherwise there are no new faces of the Black. Orange is not the new Black. Such and such is not the new Black. Black is still Black, and we're still targeted. Not to dismiss other communities, and other marginalized communities, but the anti-Blackness lies within all of those. And so for me to have true freedom is when I can step into space and I don't got to debate with somebody, I don't got to check nobody, I don't have to do those things. We could just show up and be together in joyful and harmonious space. Thank you.
Thank you, Amaja. And thank you for participating in the panel. We only have a few minutes left. I'm going to ask Mr. Hamilton and Stephen if they have any last words. And doesn't appear that we'll get to the question in the chat. I think we've answered it throughout the conversation. And so hopefully the person that asked that has the answer to their question. So Mr. Hamilton, do you have any parting words?
Oh, parting words. First, I just want to
Yes.
just thank CLS and just thank everybody just for giving me this opportunity to just speak and to this just feels so good. Like I always say, just to be able to release and just talk to people and just feel respected and just accepted. It just feels so good to me. And I just want to say, Murphy, the kid, so helpful to me. And Imaja, of course, she's helped me so much, and her family and her son. And just the community that has been there by my side. It's just, like I said, it's just something that's unexplainable. And I just appreciate everything.
Thank you, Mr. Hamilton, and we appreciate you taking the time to participate in the panel and volunteering your time to do that. And same to you, Amaja, and also Stephen, we appreciate your time so much as well. And do you have some thoughts to close out the panel?
I guess what I would, I don't do hope, I do fight. I heard someone say that earlier today, don't hope, fight. And that building community and coalition building takes time and patience and kindness and vulnerability. And this is the kind of work that I think is done, that's really about building good character, building accountability, and understanding the forces that are really determined not to let any of this happen. So just thank you, Maja. Thank you, Mr. Hamilton, and everybody who came to listen or to be engaged in this conversation, because it's all of us. We all have a part to play in it, so find your part.
We all have a part to play. Thank you, everyone, for coming. This is an ongoing conversation. It hopefully is not limited to this space. Please continue to fight, to imagine, to join together, to build community. Hopefully folks felt in community tonight, and will continue to imagine and fight when despair comes and when incarceration comes and when we feel our brothers and our sisters and our loved ones who are caged in our country, that we will remember what we shared here tonight to keep us going in connection and community. And I hope to continue to have these conversations with all of you. And thank you so much to our panelists and to everyone who listened and connected with each other tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.